Hello and welcome back to another episode of our Mega-lo-Mania in Unreal Engine. So yesterday we got the research part functional, and to achieve that we changed the construction component, or switched that out with our task component, wherever it's gone, and basically kind of treated construction jobs, or what is now called just tasks, the same as research tasks, so they could all be completed about the same time. There we go, task manager, that's the one I was looking for. So they basically run the same way now. Yes, so it does look like, we get to that where that error was, that for some reason where has it gone? It's going to play it anyway. Yeah, for some reason the sprites is not saving correctly in the widget that we've tied up. So the widget. Test sector widget, I think. That one here. So in the construction jobs, we meant to have these tied up to sprites, and every time I close the project and reopen it, the sprites disappear. So I'm just going to make this an array variable instead, a member variable instead even. I think for all intents and purposes it's render construction jobs. Yeah, so there's going to be an element of change here, because, well, not immediately, but at the moment it's just rendering all the construction jobs, and the construction jobs should only be visible when the player has the right pre-requirements for a particular building. And the pre-requirements are, as far as I can tell, simply just that the player is in the right epoch for it. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to handle the pit, the deep pit type mine, because that one isn't built by the player. It just appears on the right tech level, but at the moment it's kind of bundled in with the mine, so that might have to be some kind of special case or handled differently. Nonetheless, we'll just call it buildings. So we'll need this one to be a map between a name and a sprite. It only contains 3 elements. Now hopefully this will just stop it forgetting. So we can take that out there, tie it in with that one instead. It'll produce the same result, but hopefully, as I say, won't forget it every time I restart the project. I need to select the right level. So we currently have all the research available immediately. We have only the resources available for that particular epoch, and whether we have a mine or not. Obviously, as I say, we were able to build the mine even though this epoch doesn't support it, and it doesn't work so well when that happens. The mine task obviously has been removed, and the UI is still trying to show it. So that's the key thing here. We're not dealing with the adding and the removing of the tasks particularly well. Construction jobs would appear within the task manager, I think, when the player is able to build them, so at that particular epoch, but they obviously would be removed. Now in the proper UI, the tasks wouldn't be permanently referenced, there'd be some conditions. Whereas in the way this is working, the task widgets are created at the beginning of the game and they're not removed. Mainly because I'm rendering all of the tasks kind of independently, and while the task manager knows that it's a research and it's got to give a name, or it's a building, it's got to give a name, it doesn't know what the icon is. So having to tie that up again for a temporary UI doesn't really make much sense, at least for the time being. So one thing that we do want to do, or try and do, is see if we can get the available research to be limited by the player current tech level, or I think more specifically it's limited by the resources available. So I think it's within the castle. So currently we have this unlocked technologies array that is refreshed effectively with this refresh available technologies function. That currently is iterating through all of the technologies available in the game entirely, and picking out those that are either equal to or 3 levels above, so below 4 levels above the current epoch, and that's returning the correct set of research. Now what we actually want to do above that is make sure the player has the resources to build them. So I've added within my data a new recipes or recipe structure. And this is very kind of basic structure. It simply lists the technology as a name and all of the resources that are available in the game as a floating value, a float. And then this basically will get populated. I've put a few things in it, but because there's quite a lot of variation and combinations, I've not completed it. But obviously this is all the default values. Apparently there's 71 default values and I haven't filled it in. But I imported it from a spreadsheet, so I've just pulled the number down to 71 and all the rest is empty. But the key thing here is that I've done longbow, and we can see that longbow appears twice. And it appears twice because this one takes half of that resource, one of that resource, and I think none of the rest. Whereas the longbow takes one of this resource and one of that resource. So you can see that it covers the 2 recipes for the longbow. And I've also done the rock, and there's 3 recipes for the rock, although that actually looks like it's slightly misaligned. I've got 2 recipes for the rock and 1 for the pike. So just correct that, otherwise it's just going to confuse things a little bit. So again, with the imported data, we can just replace the original file. Unreal Engine then will notice that, click import, and we can see now that our pike doesn't have any recipes and our rock has the 3 that it should. And the rock takes 1.5 of bone, 1.5 of rock, or 1.5 of wood. So before we say that a particular research is unlocked and thus add it to that array, we want to test to see if the player has the resources for it. Now we're in an actor here, and this test is going to be done fairly regularly, in the sense that it's definitely going to have to be done when it unlocks a technology. It also has to be done when you actually use a technology, either by creating an army person or creating a defense person or using a shield, those kind of things. So we definitely need to make sure that this function is available to other widgets and other gadgets, other widgets and other actors, sorry. So we have a function library somewhere. I think I need to separate these off. So let's call it libraries. So I've got the widget macro library, a new macro library, global macro library, component macro library, and function library. Not all of them are used. I've not separated things properly yet, but that's just so far what I've created. Some of them probably kind of should be the same. Some of them perhaps even aren't used anymore. So let's add a function here and just test that we can access that. Yep. So this will be check resources for technology. Bit of a lengthy name again. We're going to want the name of the technology. And we're also going to want, probably for simplicity, we'll pass in the castle. Oh. Just so that we don't have to do anything further with the castle in the code prior to calling this. And the output of this is just going to be what's it called? Check resource for have resources, and it's going to be a boolean. So at some point we need to set that. Now the first thing that we're going to have to do is, we know this is a technology, so from the data table we're going to get that table row, get data table row. If it's not found, we'll just print out some warning. It should never really be not found, because it should never be called with a name that's not a technology, but just in case. We'll do input quote is not a technology. I'll pass that name in there. That just covers that for future reference, so we can break the technology now. We also will need to check whether we have a lab. Maybe we should check that at the same time, really. Basically, can we build this technology? Do we have what we need? But that said, I think you potentially can use a design technology or research technology after you've researched it, even if you don't have a lab, if the lab gets destroyed. So I think actually that should be better outside. So that said, therefore we don't need, it's not that, it's the recipes that we want, and it's not a row table. So let's start again. We actually want to iterate over all of the recipes for the technology. Now the recipes don't name that technology because the name has to be unique, so the row names in this case is just a number. Don't think we know when we need to end, so we won't need the break. We do have to just iterate over all of the recipes. So the array element is going to be our row name for our recipes. So obviously that gives us quite a lengthy object we have to test against. Not going to be particularly pleasant, I don't think. There's no way, the issue with this structure is there's no real way to iterate over it. So if I were to do that, I'd have to handle each of the resources individually. So I'm not particularly keen on that. Because as I say, for each one we'd have to say, is this greater than 0? So is there a requirement for that particular resource? And we'd also want to know so let's get the castle. So it's currently the mining gadget, don't know where I'm getting that from, mining component that has the resources in it. I think, is it? Where did I put the resources? Oh, okay, yeah, they're inheriting from a job, so that task. Okay, we'll have to clean that up, but so the mining component has jobs, it's still using the jobs. So the jobs is going to be an array, and for each resource there's a job, so we'd have to find that too. But because of the fact that these are all named, don't even know what set members in recipe does. I mean, oh, okay, that might be a slightly neater way of updating the progress of a job in the task the task manager. So at the moment I am, when I'm updating it, I'm using set float by ref. We're changing the current time and elapsed time, so we could do it like that, where we pass into these endpoints the actual time rather than using multiple set by ref. And just leave that there, it doesn't going to break anything. Okay, so this is a bit for a bit difficult to deal with because we don't have anything to iterate over in terms of managing the recipes. Now we could fix that by, rather than using an array, using a header for each of the resources, which is fairly clean and straightforward way of doing them, but there doesn't seem to be a way to get a property from a structure without just dragging pins from all these resources. I suppose I could create a function. So it's still going to be like 20 functions or 20 calls to the same function. I'll find so if we were going to do the bone one to start with, we would go into this with bone, yeah. I think what we could do though is, because the mining component is specialized already, we could put the function in here. So basically we're going to say on the mining component, where we go, farm function library, call this function, obviously we're going to call it a lot, but we're going to just stick with the first three and see how it turns out. I'm not particularly keen on it because of the mass amount of repetition that's going to go into it. I think I'll do slate as well, because I think that's just another recipe that this particular, sorry, wood. So now in our mining component we can find an existing job. Obviously that's referencing the resources, but I'm going to fix that up soon, given that name. If we found it, that means we've got some resources of that given type. And we use current time to determine how many we have. So we want current time, actually we want quantity, get it right, current time is greater than or equal to our quantity. If that's true, we have the resources we need to make it. I think we probably could just return there. So the return value would be a boolean. For that. So that's fairly straightforward. If we've got a name per resource and a quantity of it, this function will tell us whether we've got enough stuff. bit that's just a pain is this part here. It's going to have to be fairly massive to account for all the different resources. And I think there might be a better way. It's just there's a trade-off here between keeping the data table clean, because the data table at the moment is just simply a simple table with all the resources down, or the technology down on the left, duplicated depending on how many recipes that technology has, and then all the technology across the top, effectively just the same as we had with the data table, isn't it? But point being, it's very straightforward. It's going to be easy to see, well, as easy as it is to see with all those floats, but fairly easy to see what recipes are available for different technologies. An alternative way is to bundle all of these technologies into basically a map within the column. That way I'd actually be able to iterate over the map names. It'll make the code cleaner, but it will make the table management a little bit more difficult. So let's see what we've got with this. So mining component's fine. So we call that function, we get a variable. We'd have to set this each time. Do the appropriate response value, or return value even. And then from all of those we can just return. So that should tell me whether a particular resource is available for a particular technology. So now when we're refreshing available technologies, we can call our function with our technology name. We are in the castle, so that's just a reference to self. Now we could in theory pass in the mining component straight in, but we may need the castle for other things, so we're passing in the castle just in case. Do another branch, and only add it if we have the appropriate resources. Now that means we shouldn't see any technologies. So far so good. So the game actually begins with a number of number of resources available to the player. So we add the technologies, the resources. They're all the building tasks. Okay, so we don't add the resources there. Update mining jobs, that must be it. Oh no, that's just trying to find where we add those initial resources. Forgot where it was. So we know that they are added by calling the construction components begin job. So just need to find out where that's called. Update available resources. Okay. So this is in the sector resources. That's probably why I couldn't find it, because it's hidden there. Available resources, this one, hasn't got any, but the resources of the map does. We're saying we have 100 of each of those 3 resources. So we can begin the job with a certain amount of resources. So I think this is trying to work with the construction component, and the jobs is just making the resource stuff a bit of a pain. So we want a actor component. We're going to call it the resource manager now to go with our task manager. And effectively it's going to do a lot what the construction component did and the mining component did, but actually relevant to resources rather than relevant to construction stuff. So the resource manager will store the resources. So we also need a structure. We'll put it in the data. So we can't have it as resources or resource because that's the data table information. The resource maps up the display names, types and sprites, and the resources just define that. So we can't do that. I don't really know what else to call it. I guess player resource is going to be good enough. So first variable is the name of the resource. Second variable, so basically going to kind of copy what we did for the jobs to a point, but just make it relevant. So assigned population, so we're just going to call them minus, and we need a quantity. So the assigned population is always going to be a whole number, but the quantity can be half numbers. So the resource manager will have an array of resources. Or an array of player resource. And these will be replicated. So on the event tick for our construction component, we called the update construction jobs function, and our construction event basically did a check for whether we've got authority with the current function, stuff like that. So we need to do this effectively the same again. We only want to do resource updates on the server. So the get owner is the actor, which will be the castle, and we check the authority of that. If that's true, we now need to update the resources. So the resources was using the same formula as the construction, and I'll probably just keep that. That kind of implies that it was going down, not up. But oh well. Maybe I actually overrode it here. Update mining job. Yeah, okay, I overrode it. That makes more sense. Okay, so most of that applies in our resource manager. We'll just have a function and we'll call it mine resources. Which actually is the same name I've given the one on the sector. So we iterate over all the resources that we have. Now we used this method, the get and then the break, so that we had a reference to it. But maybe we don't need to do that. So we can break the player resource. We have a name, how many miners, and the quantity. We have to call the mine resource on the sector. Okay, so we want to say if we have some miners. Obviously, if we don't have miners, all of this is unnecessary. So if we have some miners, then all I did was divide it by 10, multiply it by nothing, and add it together. So we use this set members in player resource this time. Seems a bit cleaner. So we divide the miners by 10. Maybe we should cast it to a float first. Now we divide it by 10. Yeah, multiplying it by 0 would produce 0, so that's never really going to make any difference. So probably because it actually needs a delta time. That's where I've gone wrong. So I've missed. It's not multiplying it by 10 in the mining component, it's multiplying it by delta seconds. That's what I've missed. Okay. Input. Better. Makes more sense. Then we want to call our mined resource. And we want to set our value, our quantity, plus the mined, set the quantity. We just need to get the sector. And the name. That should duplicate everything we've got here. So we can get rid of all that now. Straighten it up. Okay, looks right. So that should do our mining. Take it off the sector and add it to the player resource. we need the assign population function. To assign population took a name for a given resource and the population to change it by. So this is pretty much the same as how we had before. Do you want to take our check resource function as well? Resources as the variable use. So. So we probably don't want to use find existing jobs. This confirms we have the resources to do what we need to do. We are going to need a function to find the resource. Maybe a macro is slightly nicer in this case. What I was trying to do. Not sure really if two inputs and outputs would make most sense. Oh, actually we wanted the resource as well. Let's not forget that. I think actually doing it like that. Be a bit cleaner. So now we're going to call our get resource instead. Don't need to do the branch. Obviously, the little awkwardness with this particular case is that oh, okay, never mind. That works. Didn't realise you could have multiple returns on a function. Kind of just makes some sense. That returns true, that returns false. Or that returns true or false, and that returns only ever false. So that's fine. So that checks our resource, make sure we've got however many we want for it. We can also use our get resource in this context. That's not the one I wanted. If we found it, we want to set the minus to whatever they were, plus whatever we've added. We don't have any return value from assign minus, so we'll just leave that as is. So the mine resources work, the assign minus work, check resources work, and the get resources work. Yeah, the only issue is we kind of leave halfway through the loop, but I don't think that makes any difference. It might do actually, because we might, in the case of using this macro, what might happen is that we'll come out and we'll go back into it again. So I think what we want to do yeah, so the awkwardness of having a macro in this context is that I think we're still iterating through the things when we come out of here. So wherever we come out of here, we'll get to the end of the call chain, and then we'll go round again. Which is not going to be what we want. So instead of returning here, we will nope, doesn't like found. Exists. So what we do instead is we store the integer and use that I think I've had this problem before now, because that's going to be a bad number, isn't it? I don't really know how to handle these ones correctly. As a macro anyway, because I think the macro causes it problems. Yeah, I don't think as a macro it's going to work. Because we can't leave this loop while we're still finding what we want to find. So the issue with the macro was that put them back. No matter how we leave here, it's always going to try and get a reference to a resource from the array at that given index, and obviously -1 is going to be invalid if it hasn't set it. If it has set it, it'll get it correctly and everything will be fine, but if it hasn't set it, there is no way that I can see how to avoid it doing that. That might work. Create a blank one. So if that is greater than, case we do have the need for the break. So we can set it, break it. So if we come in and we're trying to find a given name, we iterate over until we find it. Once we find it, we save the index. If the index is greater than 0, then we call this set player resource structure by reference. So effectively that kind of gives us a copy. Let's see what these are. Target and value. Yeah, so the value is the one we've just got. That one is the one we have. And then we return it. Obvious issue here is that using this function is not going to return as a reference, it's going to return as a copy. Another alternative is if we don't tie up the false case, then execution will only ever continue if we have the resource, which I suppose makes some sense. Get resource in a function wouldn't return as a reference either, so we'd have to return an index. Let's not do that, all that. try that actually. So that shouldn't, because it doesn't do the output, execution doesn't continue, we shouldn't actually cause any problems with undefined references and basically trying to reference a resource that doesn't exist. Check resource is fine using get resource in its current context. However, assign minors isn't, because that's not going to be a reference, that's going to be a copy of. So we'll have to get it again so that we can change it. Unfortunately, structures aren't passed around as references quite in the same way that actors are, so kind of have to do it ourselves. Mine resources is fine because we're just iterating over them all anyway. We'll get rid of that one. Okay, so now in the castle we need to add our mining component. Oh, not a mining component. Our mining manager. Resource manager. Got to make sure it's replicated. And okay, what did we have in here? So we have check resource, which we've got in the other new code. Update mining job, which we've got in the new code. Overriding the event for that. Not doing anything there. So the mining component's completely duplicated now, or re-implemented in the resource manager. The construction component, we have the update, we have the find and the assign and the begin. We've covered all them I think too. Jobs aren't completed. Okay, so I think what we can now do is remove from the castle all of the references to the old things. So we just have the task manager for research, construction and manufacturing jobs. We have the resource manager for actual doing resources. So in our UI, which is going to be a bit upset now, let's find out where the problems are. Nope, no problems. That's probably not true. Player controller will be a problem. There we go. So we don't have a mining component anymore. We have our resource manager. With assign minus. It's exactly the same as our assign population used to be though, so just tie them up. Get rid of that old one. And so the UI here has the render resources. So we're going over the available resources on the sector. Is that true? Yeah, I guess it's true. I don't think the resources should have available resources on the sector. So what we're going to do is have the available resources in our mining component. These should be to the owner only. Doesn't really matter. Available resources are not so important, but only the owner really needs to know. Now they're currently updated on this function. Let's get rid of all the building based graphs. Okay, so this is taking the available resource out of the resources map for the, so basically the removing them from the sector, effectively giving them to the player. So update available resources. Why does the sector need to do this? The sector probably doesn't. So resource manager. We do need to do the mine resources call. So we're going to have a custom event here for refresh available resources, because many things are going to call this, but it is only going to be on the server, because only the server should update the available resources. So first task is to clear any existing data. So we start with a clean sheet. And so first thing we need to know is, does the sector have any of the resources available? Or really, what resources are available for the sector? So from here we need to get the owner, which will be our castle, and then from there we need to cast it to a castle, and then get the sector, and then get the resources. So iterate over those. We want to know if we have more than 0 of them. If we do, I think we just do need to do all of this. So the way of name should be that one. Break the resource. So I haven't got the castle again, so we need to use that to get. No, it's on the sector, isn't it? It's on the sector. I need to get the mining reference to the mine. So in this case, we're just checking that we've got the sectors over a given tech level, and we have a mine. And then we add it to the available resources. Just going to switch on the light. So the epoch needs to come from the sector 2. Okay, so that should give us a clue on what's available when it's called. Now we have to be careful when to call it, because the owner isn't going to be set immediately. Not the begin play part, I don't think. I think what we could do is in the castle event graph, I guess just probably before we do all of the buildings, we will get our resource manager and call the refresh function. Should mean that it doesn't go wrong. So mining task, yes, mining task. So the UI part of it we haven't updated yet. UI part is going to be referencing the mining component. So from the castle we want to actually get the resource manager. It's not going to have jobs, it is going to have resources. So for each of those resources, we want to assign the population and quantity and the name. Yeah, because this resource task has been created for the available resources, so that should be fine. Like so. Yep, that be okay. Let's see where we are now. Okay, so we have one resource. Doesn't look like its numbers have been updated because they're all 000s. Having one resource is about right. That's kind of what I'd expect. Oh, I've got a whole bunch of errors. I guess that's where the problem is. Okay. So it looks like that's probably failing. Which would imply the owner's not set correctly. Probably the same for this. So let's just quickly test. So the building isn't an owner, I don't think, it's the parent. Oh no. Where are we? We are the building. So it is just sector. Probably need a little bit more information on my string than that because I can't see it from all the rest. Too many logs, too many errors. Yeah, so the it should have been castle, but the same issue happens. Okay, so the attached to sector though, that one does work. That's why I have it. So that one returns false. There's no sector is invalid at this point. But that one should work. So in the castle, what's it called? Attached to sector. Attached to sector. So we can, I don't know, I'm going to override it. So it'd be better probably to do all of this stuff here instead. Because that means we know we've got the sector at this point. We also need to call the base class function. Otherwise, it won't do it. There we go. So that should make it a little less error-y. So the next issue is over here, inject resources. Where are we? Mining component. Yeah. Okay, we shouldn't even have a mining component anymore. So castle resource manager. Resource manager will have a check resource function. So this is just wired together exactly as it was before, just with this new function now. So that's rock, slate and wood. Okay, down to the last few errors. Okay, so we're trying to bind to the construction component for job completion, for building completion really. So we want to get the task manager instead. And we want to bind to task completed. So this one is going to be a little bit more generic than the previous one was. I think we used to call construct a building. No, not construct a building, must be on construction completed. So it's now going to have to be on task completed. It's on the task manager. Task. Task completed is the name and the type. kind of does say there, but doesn't say what property it's byte property is. So we only care if this is a construction job. If it is a construction job, then construction completed. We want to call those two functions. Where are we in this case? We're actually on the sector, so yeah, the sector may not be currently possessed, and in theory then it isn't really owned by anybody. So I think the way that we did this owner and cast is fine. We don't seem to need to know that it's just a generic player controller. It is a generic player controller, it's just owner is not a player controller. Okay, so that produces the same result. Mining component. Okay, so update available resources uses a mining component to add to the jobs. We don't actually need to do that, but we do need to add them to the mining component in some manner or fashion. Basically, we just don't need that. We're actually iterating through the resources ourselves here, but we can use the get resource function. We can't because it's a macro. Okay. That changes things. We can't use it as a macro because we do need to call it from outside. Most of it is the same though. So that will be the name. And we will return our resource. Oops. Return our resource, and we'll return our index for it. Call that resource and index. In the case of false, there'll be no resource and -1. So use the function here instead. And the function here. I suppose that's one advantage. So that didn't actually do that. If it's greater than -1. Micro doesn't have actually multiple outputs, so I'm not really sure. This function probably wasn't tied up properly. Switch that around. I need to find out where I was trying to call that. Over here. So now we can just call get resource instead of all of that. Oh, is that what we wanted? Yeah, because in the context of a mining task, we actually know which resource we want. So that should be that one. So, where are we? What we probably don't have is available resources. Let's start from the beginning. So, when our mining task has its mining manager, refresh available resources. Something out. It becomes available. Print something out too. So we will have resource is available. Okay, so the refresh calls, resource wood is available, so that's fine. So at the moment, I think I'm creating mining resource or mining tasks for all of the available resources, probably far too soon. So what we'll do, and we also need to make sure that the available resources gets to the player. So I think one way we can do this is when the available resources are replicated to the clients, we will trigger an event. We'll just call it updated. Keep it generic. And when the sector widget is tied to the castle, so at the moment the sector widget is effectively refreshing everything every frame, every tick. Okay, so the sector widget should be spawned from our HUD. When the sector is changed, we determine if we own it, and then we create the appropriate sector widget. Now we need to separate that off into a sector widget that's good for kind of read-only and actual management, but for now we're showing a widget or we're not. So the create test sector widget does actually contain the sector, which is good. So in the event construct, we should have the sector available, rather than just going straight in and trying to render the available resources that may not be available yet. Maybe we should just verify that's the case first. Oh, okay, so we're getting them from the sector. That's obviously a problem, because we shouldn't be getting them from the sector anymore. We want the castle, we want the resource component or resource manager, and the available resources from him instead. See if that makes any difference. Okay, so that one. So let's just find out how many available resources we have. I think it does have an available resource of 1, which is fine. I suppose that must be true because we're creating the let's get rid of that then. update available resources, not here. So we were doing a check to make sure that it was available before we were mining it. Probably would want to do that as well. Okay, so we do need to do the update available resources at other times, but I have to figure out when that would be. So I think all of this is obsolete anyway. Whatever I did, I took too much away. It's definitely not got anything to do with it anyway. Not with it working or not. So I am running out another dedicated server just to ensure that I don't put things in the wrong place. Let's try and figure out how we've broken it. So our level creates our sectors. Once all the sectors are done, we bind and then we call the new player joined event. We get all the sectors, we iterate over them until we claim one, then we possess it. You wonder why the camera doesn't set correctly with that. Probably because I actually tell it not to, don't I? If I remember correctly. Player controllers. Yeah, we've taken off the auto manage camera. Player controller. Just seeing if we can find out why the camera's a bit weird to start with. Ah, wrong button. So we're viewing sector 0. We get that and we set the camera. If we're the owner, which we are, try again. If we're the owner, which we are, we possess it, and then we call the sector changed. Okay, so back over to our play controller. Sector changed. Okay, that's where we deal with the HUD. It doesn't explain why. The camera's not right when we start. I guess the main thing is we don't actually possess it, do we? If we no, we want is valid. This one. So let's just see when or if that ever changes. Okay, so it's saying yes, it's saying that we do actually possess a pawn. I think maybe we should just restructure this. View sector. So when we're viewing a sector, we should replicate it to the server. So first, let's figure out which I don't think we should. So we clamp the value there as well. So let's say we get told which sector to view here. Then we want to say is that less than the length of our sectors? If it isn't less than our sectors, then we don't want to do anything. If it is less than the end of our sectors, then we will carry on. So in this case, I think we're okay to set the index now. Once we've set the index, I think we should determine whether we own it first. If we own it, so I think we'll do a sequence just to make it obvious what we want to do under these circumstances. First, we want to check the owner. We are in the player controller. Actor. Okay, we don't get it yet. A bit too soon. From this, we want to get so if we are the owner, then we want to possess it. In either case, we want to look at it and finally we'll want to trigger the event. So that's a bit cleaner on exactly what needs to be done. Doesn't solve the problem we're looking at, but okay, so we're getting lots of yeses, but we're still not actually looking at the sector. If we're not the owner, we do want to unpossess it. If we are the owner, we forgot to actually tell it which one to possess. Does that make any difference? No. So we possessed it. Should be setting the camera to it now. And then we're calling the change sector. If the camera doesn't change, maybe we're doing it too soon. It's a bit of an annoying one. Does that make any difference? Yes, that makes all the difference. Maybe the actor hasn't came through yet to the client. I think I've got a plan to try and resolve that, so I'm just going to leave this as is. Also have the castle back. I don't really know how. Don't really know where it went away. But we've got the castle back nonetheless. So, one sector change doesn't work. That's probably because I forgot to tie it up correctly. Where was that? Play controller. We need to add the two properties in. So we just say whether we're the owner or not, just to avoid any further checks or to skip any further checks. And pass in the sector, so that should now give us our UI back. There we go. Maybe when the sector changes, the UI should be removed, regardless. So within the level, we are calling possess here, so I'm just going to skip that. Still looks like we've got we still have possession. It's probably because when we're calling the view sector stuff. So let's not do that. It's better. So what we're avoiding there is when we claim the sector, which we'll do at the start of the game, we won't actually tell it to look at that sector. We'll figure that out some other way. Sector test level blueprint. Yep, so when the sector is changed, we remove all the widgets. One thing that we do want to do, oh, and we need to do that one, not that one. There we go. That'll help. I don't know why the sector, there's clearly some error. from the player controller. Ah, okay, owner is not that one. His owner is that one there. Is owner is a bit of an awkward function. Where am I? I'm in the sector. So I'm asking the sector. And the owner's doing, sector's doing it based on the castle. Actually, what we want really is just it to be pure. So in that case, now it's pure, we can do it for slightly easier for both cases. I should clean that one up. Where are we at now? So we don't check to see if we're on the same one. I think that's something we can do. If we're being told to go onto the same one, we don't really want to do anything because it does make it a little bit flickery. So, not equal. Punch. There you go. That's all we need to do to prevent that little flicker when we press the button to basically view the same sector we're viewing. If I go up from there, we can see when we go down, we don't get any flicker now because we're basically just saying don't do anything if we're on the same sector. Okay, so we've got no population and we've got no other stuff, so we've got a few errors still. Play a pawn. Okay. So there's no errors in that case. As soon as we go down, we get some errors. So we're viewing sector 0. Vendor resource task. So those errors we're getting. For each loop. So it's trying to read the property of a castle, the castle ref. somewhere in here. Must be that one. So the event tick of the main widget. If the player pawn is valid and it's a sector, we don't get either of those two errors, so it must be a sector. I do the check before I use the castle reference as reference. Let's just make sure in the player controller we are possessing our... So we are possessing it. So the sector is valid. Set some text on the level. Oops. Minor error there. So the sector is fine, but perhaps the castle reference is not. But even if it wasn't, shouldn't actually cause any errors. Not really sure what's going on here. It's complaining about weird bits of code. Let's just save everything. See if compiling everything out, everything makes sense, makes it better even. Nope, we're still getting the same errors. Okay, so not quite sure where the errors are coming from. The information here is limited. Render resource task. Oops, too far. That's handled in here. So yeah, that's cleared up the error, but obviously that's not quite what I'm after. There's clearly something wrong with this chain, and it is getting confused on quite where it is. But I haven't put any protection validation in this case to make sure that we've got a sector and so on and so forth. Whereas in this case, I'm using get player pawn rather than using the sector itself. In theory that should work just the same. We can test that because we obviously got the date. So the date still shows. Yeah, so that print string doesn't show up. Render resources on the construction of the widget doesn't work because the castle reference is invalid. I think though that there's probably a scenario where I don't ever see no pawn, I don't think. Oh, because I'm not printing it at all. Yeah, so in the event tick I don't have a problem. Neither of those two texts come up anymore. I'll ignore the fact that it says not a pawn at the moment. But in the construct, my sector does not have a castle reference. Even though that should have been done ages ago. Unless the construction isn't working properly. Yeah, I see that. So the castle reference is replicated to the owner. Maybe again there's a delay. Maybe that's where the problem is. Let's try that. Yeah. Doesn't make sense how the tick has the sector and the castle. Although I suppose actually there's no guarantee it has a castle. Here we go. Wasn't dealing with that scenario. That's a problem, yes. So that did point out a lot of text. So that means the castle reference is not getting replicated over again, or at the moment, which is odd. It's probably because the player doesn't own it. Where do we possess it? In the player controller. Yeah, so that's probably going to be a problem here. We're probably not going into possess, although I thought I put a breakpoint there and it worked. We're possessing it now, but I don't think we own the castle. But if we don't own the castle, then that wouldn't work. Sector. Okay, well, fortunately I've run out of time to try and figure out what's gone wrong here. I have to pick it up again next stream. Not sure when that will be. Hopefully I'll get some time over the weekend, but it can be a bit difficult. But yeah, if I don't get time to stream over the weekend, I should at least get some time to figure out what's going wrong here, and at least fix that up. It's a bit annoying that we've gone a little bit backwards in that area at least, but there's some cleanup of the classes. So the way the resource works, or should work, is better once I actually have it working. Just need to figure out where the problem is here, beyond just another replication issue across the server to the clients. Okay, so thanks for watching, and that's all for now. Thank you.